Ani Bonjour. Henry Evans Tenrick. I'm with the Hamilton Coalition to Stop the War, and I'm also a member of Hamilton District Labour Council. I'd like to start with acknowledging that we're on the lands of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Neutral, the Mississauga of the Credit, and this land is guarded under the Treaty of No Dish with One Spoon. What that means is we all have a responsibility to share and to protect the resources that we enjoy with our First Nations hosts. And I hope that we all are here in peace and that we all go away with that knowledge. Miigwech.
So as we gather on stolen land where an ongoing genocide continues against Indigenous peoples, we are here tonight to talk about refusal. Audrey Simpson, a Mohawk scholar from Ganawage, focuses her work on the politics of refusal and how Mohawk and more broadly nations and members of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy's refusal of the settler colonial state of Canada and the United States as political actions of resistance. Not far from here, Haudenosaunee land defenders and their accomplices established 1492 Land Back Lane in 2020 to refuse and resist against settler housing development on their land that is a violation of their land rights. Across Turtle Island, the struggle for land and the rights of Indigenous peoples continues. Refusal is a powerful action we can take to resist settler colonial states. However, this work cannot just be done by Indigenous peoples alone. Settlers must also refuse colonization and genocide. From Turtle Island to Palestine, occupation, settler colonialism, apartheid, ethnic cleansing, and genocide are crimes. Crimes that these states continue to perpetuate. As a white Jewish settler living on Turtle Island, there is much I can learn from Tal and Einat and how to refuse to participate in settler colonial violence. As the genocide continues in Gaza, demolitions of villages and settler violence worsens in the West Bank, our conversation this evening bears immense importance, as we cannot be silent, inactive, or neutral in situations of oppression. Einat and Tal haven't. Einat is 21, is a queer Israeli activist and conscientious objector. Going from the queer youth movement to climate activism, Einat gained political consciousness and became a human rights activist. At age 19 in 2022, she refused to serve in the Israeli military and was sentenced to 87 days in military prison. After her release, she presented her story to Conscientious Objection at the UPR review in the UN. Since then, she's been involved in various avenues of struggle against the occupation, both within 48 borders and the West Bank. Tal, who is 19, is an Israeli activist and conscientious objector. In December 2023, Tal was the first conscientious objector to refuse after October 7th, and his story resonated with media outlets worldwide. He served a prolonged sentence of 185 days in military prison. Tal started his activism in the protests against judicial overhaul, and initiating a mass youth refusal letter signed by over 250 teenagers, naming the occupation as a source of rising fascism. Currently, he is organizing and supporting future conscientious objectors. Please give a warm welcome to Tal.
Thank you for having us here. We're very excited. I think we're going to start with, do you want to start?
Yeah, for sure. Can you hear me? Yeah. Thank you all for coming. Thank you to the United Church for having us and making space for our voices. And thank you to independent Jewish voices and all the other people that made this whole thing possible. I'd like to start with just talking about what's happening right now while we're sitting here in Palestine and in Israel. After the supposed ceasefire deal, which wasn't really a ceasefire, as we all know, there has been an escalating amount of violence in the West Bank. Over 40,000 Palestinians ethnically cleansed from their homes in Jenin, escalating violence in Masaferiata, and other communities throughout the West Bank, daily settler pogroms in the villages. And in Gaza, the electricity has been cut off by the Israeli Minister of Electricity. And inside 48, we're still seeing mass amounts of political repression to talk about the war, about the genocide, seeing the violence. Until now, it has been mostly on Palestinians and also on Jewish Israeli activists. Now we're seeing professors in universities getting expelled for their tweets about the genocide. And that's the context that we're here to talk about today. So, Einat, would you like to start?
Yeah, so I think I'll start by sharing that the military is a very big part of our lives as Israeli Jews. Growing up, it's very clear that once you finish high school, you go to the military, you do your service, and then you can choose whatever path you want. It's clear, as if it seems as it's clear right here, that like here in Canada, that you go to college after high school. Going to the military is seen as a duty and as a privilege to give back to the country that protects you. And for me, it was, like everyone, it was part of my life, and it was clear that's what I'm going to do. And also, I have a grandpa who fought in the 67 war, in the 73 war. He spent many years in reserve, and it really affected our family. I grew up in Tel Aviv, but my grandparents live in a kibbutz 5 kilometers from the Gaza border. And growing up and visiting them a lot, sleeping over, there have been many sirens, and you have 15 seconds to run to the shelter. And I remember that one time I asked my grandma, because I knew that there's bombing also in Gaza, because you can hear it. Sometimes you hear bombs and there's no sirens, so you understand it's in Gaza and not in 48 borders. And I asked her, what do the kids in Gaza also have a shelter? And she said that usually they don't. And it's so terrifying as a kid to hear the siren and the bomb that comes just a few seconds after, and imagining them not having any shelter. And my grandma continues, and she tells me how she visited a few times in Gaza, and that the beach is the most beautiful beach in the world, that's how she says, and that she wishes one day there won't be any borders and we can just go to the beach in Gaza or go to the beach in Tel Aviv, and the Palestinians from there can come to our beaches. And I think, like, from a young age, I didn't really resonate with militarism, patriotism, even before I had those words, before I had that vocabulary. I remember sitting in Memorial Days, and in Israel, the Memorial Day is the day before the Independence Day, and I couldn't really grasp how can we mourn so deeply the ones who died, and then we're told that we should also be strong soldiers when we grow up. That was my childish thought, but I think that's the seeds, that's the roots to where I got to today. And I grew up in a Zionist leftist household. I heard the word occupation. I didn't know what it meant. I know that we opposed Bibi. But then when I grew up, I started to have more of a political understanding and got interested in what's going on. And I also had this feeling. I always felt different from the other girls. And then I had that word at 15. I came out, and I had that word, this term to say that I am a queer woman. And I think that's when I started to find community. Then it was queer community, but as time went by, I understood that it's a community for other values and in a wider sense than that. really when I started to get into activism, because after feeling different and, until you find the terms and you find your community, and then realizing that my trans friends don't have the same experience as I do, and they go through struggles that I haven't experienced, and learning about the history of my community and the ones who came before me, it really motivated me to also be part of the struggle and be part of protest and to learn more. And I feel like once you have those glasses or that sensitivity to social injustices, then it comes with a responsibility. And it comes with a responsibility to also be sensitive to other oppressed groups and to the injustices that they face and to the oppression that they face, and not just what I face. And I think, and there that really got me interested in seeing that those intersectionalities and joining climate activism, learning what climate justice meant, and meeting meeting those, like the systems, the oppressive system meeting them in the parliament and meeting them on the streets, and seeing like that it's all connected, and the systems that oppress us and the systems that are the same systems that oppress us queer people and oppressed women are also the ones who usually we're fighting against on climate issues. Seeing that everything is connected it was really meaningful. And inside of the climate activism, I made Palestinian friends, and that's a very irregular thing at 17 to make Palestinian friends. We live in a very, very separated society. Meeting them, I didn't even know that there's Palestinians inside the 48 borders, because I was told that they're Israeli Arabs. So even the fact that they identified as Palestinian was blew my mind, and hearing that the stories that their grandparents told me are not the stories that that their grandparents told them, are not the stories that my grandparents told me, and hearing the word Nakba for the first time. It's an early age to hear the word Nakba at 17 as an Israeli Jew. Usually people hear it in their adulthood. So having those friends and hearing that we live in the same place but in different realities. There's things that I can say in protest, on social media, and nothing's going to happen to me. There's things that they can't let themselves to say. There's criticism they can't express publicly. And that was where I understood that I'm not going to serve in the military that oppresses my friends and their families. And so when I decided that at 17, and I shared with my family and shared with my friends from high school, I got mixed comments. Some supported me from the beginning, and many didn't really understand why I did this decision, and some said that I'm selfish for doing that. It's seen as selfish to decide not to go to the military, because what's a few months in prison in comparison to a service of 2 years or 3 years? As it's seen as not taking part, not giving back to the society which I grew up in, and not taking back to the country that, not taking part in securing our society. And for me, it feels like it's the biggest act of taking responsibility for the society that I live in. I decided to refuse, and especially publicly refuse, because I care about the place that I come from. It's my home, and I want to create change in the society, and I want to take responsibility. I feel like refusal isn't necessarily a privilege, but being public about it definitely is. And so I appealed to see a conscientious committee, which the Israeli Conscientious Committee only exempts on pacifist grounds. And they didn't recognize me as a conscientious objector. And so I came on my enlistment day on September 4th, 2022. Me and 3 other guys had similar enlistment dates, and we connected through Missalvot Network, which is the network that supports refusers. That's where we come from. And we publicly refused, and there was a big campaign, and we were on the media, and there were solidarity protests with us, and I sat in prison for 87 days until I was able to see another conscientious committee and get exempted. And I sat 87 days in military prison, but the guys that refused with me sat 115 days, 130 days. Men usually sit more time. Taz going to tell you how much time he sat. Let's sit more time than women. I think I'll let Tal share his story too.
I'd like to start with acknowledging how privileged we are in our society. Both of us grew up in Tel Aviv, and to be honest, you could live your whole life in Tel Aviv without even thinking or hearing or feeling the occupation, the oppression that goes on just 60 kilometers, 30 kilometers from where you live, and even in Jaffa, right next to us. So we are very privileged also with the Palestinians, but also in our own society. We come from middle-class homes. I come from a very liberal family. In no means is all my family of the same opinion as me, but they respect me and they love me and they support me in all my decisions. And growing up, I remember that politics was always a discussion in my house. My dad was a journalist, and I remember him going to interview Israeli government officials and Palestinian militants and covering the Middle East with a critical eye. In first grade, there was one of the many assaults on Gaza. There was an activity in school. The activity was to write letters to soldiers that are currently fighting in Gaza. First grade is 6 years old. I keep remembering that. And this just comes to prove that no matter how liberally educated, how progressive the background is, the systems of militarism reach each and every child that goes in them. And I can say from personal experience that I know that it reached me too in some way. I remember, I wasn't that young, but maybe in start of middle school, fantasizing about crawling in the dirt, holding a weapon, wearing the uniform, and sacrificing for the nation that I live in. And it's very important to say that these romanticizations, these thoughts, are deeply rooted in the patriarchy that exists in our society. What's seen as to be a man is to be in the front lines, holding a weapon, killing and getting killed for the nation. And the system uses the patriarchy to infect young boys' minds into this crazy idea of war, because it's a choice that our government makes to maintain the occupation and to keep going on with this horrendous war that is a genocide. Around the start of my teens, I used to be a math nerd, and around my early teens, I was in this math program. And at the same time with this math program, I started to take after my father and learn about what's happening around me. And it was really an experience that shaped my political understanding of the land that I come from and the land that I live in. But while doing this math program and knowing that maybe I don't want to be the one holding the guns, the one shooting, all of us were thinking of accelerating in math and finishing as early as we can with the high school program, and maybe in the last couple of years of high school have some time off of math, but the system had a different plan for us. We were marketed this idea that if we finish math early, and then we could go and quickly finish our first degree, and then right after that, we can get into an elite intelligence unit and maximize the way we can give back to our country. And of course, after that, you get into an elite high-tech job that pays very well at only age 26. So to think about a 13-year-old thinking about what he will be doing at 26 and having that go through the military and the intelligence industry. It talked to a lot of us. It seemed like a very good plan. And also it quieted my inner morals of, okay, this seems like I'm not going to go to fight. I'm just going to be at an office job or doing some math. But in 2021, during COVID, my father, who was a great influence on my politicization, fell sick with cancer. And after months of treatments, of medication, of chemotherapy, of going to the best doctors in the kind of cancer that he had, he passed away. And I'm not here to talk about this, but I'm sure that there are a lot of people in the crowd that also lost close ones and know the feeling that it is to lose someone so close to you and so special to you. A couple months after his passing, when me and my family were still in very big grief, I kept taking after him and learning about what's happening around me. And I remember seeing a post on an Israeli human rights organization's Instagram, B'Tselem, if you've heard of them. It was a story of a baby in Gaza. A baby that was born, and after a couple months, she got diagnosed with a disease that if she was here in Canada or born in Tel Aviv, she would have gone to the doctor, maybe gotten a few treatments, and then lived on to have a happy life. But because she was born in Gaza, the baby by the name of Fatima, her doctor was in East Jerusalem. And to get to East Jerusalem, you need a permit from the Israeli system. After getting denied and denied and delayed and denied, Fatima, at the age of 7 months, passed away. And that invoked great emotion in me, also in this very big grief. And the thought that I just couldn't get away from was how privileged me and my family are, that we don't have to live with the question of what if. Fatima's parents will forever have to live with the question of what if we were born on the other side of this line, what if we had treatment, what if we had accessibility to the type of medicine that we needed. And that's the point where I realized that not only could I not take part in the active fighting, I could not take part in any part of the industry that is bent on the oppression of the Palestinian people. At this point, I was a very opinionated young 15-year-old, but I didn't really do anything with those opinions until the rise of this new government. And I know that all the governments that Israel has had have been fascist, have enacted occupation, and have enacted oppression on the Palestinian people. And in the same sentence, the government that Netanyahu formed in 2023 was even worse, allying himself with Ben Gvir and Smotrich, people that praise mass murderers like Baruch Goldstein. Then they started to enact the judicial reform, which I'm sure a lot of you heard about, trying to seize the judiciary into the power of the government and to oppress gay rights, women's rights, and also to annex more and more territory from the West Bank inside of Israel. So mass protests started against this judicial reform. And luckily for me, they went right under my street, so I went out to protest. And going out, I didn't really know what to think, but I just saw this sea of Israeli flags. And hearing the messages from these protesters, hearing who comes to speak with the protesters, which are military generals and politicians and all these highly esteemed people in Israeli society, I had a very hard time resonating with that. They were talking about going back to the old Israel, before Netanyahu, before Ben-Gvir, before this new wave of kind of how could fascism get to us? And just in the first protest, I found my home inside this huge swarm of people that were very liberal but very center. I found the anti-occupation bloc, which was a bloc of protesters who called and tied the knot between the judicial reform and the ongoing occupation, saying that the leading cause of this rising fascism is the occupation of the 67 territories, of the oppression inside the 48 borders, saying that the main motive, of course, it is also to create this religious state and to make it more and more conservative, but it's also to the judiciary they saw is a wall in front of their desires to annex and to take over more and more Palestinian territory. After a couple months of protesting, me and a bunch of other young people, we drafted a letter stating that we will refuse to enlist in a military that sustains this occupation and sustains this oppression. And we got over 280 signatures, and at an event occupying my old school, we released the letter in front of the world. We got a lot of media attention, especially a lot from inside Israel, which was surprising. There was a rising wave of normalization of using military service and using the refusal as an act of political power. Until then, the military has been seen as this kind of golden goose that no one should touch and no one is allowed to touch, even for political means. And now it was beginning to feel a little bit more hopeful. This was all happening in the end of August, start of September of 2023. About a month before our whole world would be flipped on its head.
So during this time, Tal was already preparing his refusal. His enlistment date was on December 2023, and I was preparing to go to an Arabic course in Musafiriyata in South Hamon Hills. Musafiriyata is a community, is a bunch of Palestinian villages in the South Hamon Hills in the West Bank. This community was shown to its story was shown to the world now in No Other Land, the documentary that won the Oscars. I really encourage everyone to see No Other Land if you haven't yet. And this community has a very strong connection with internationals and Israelis in the nonviolent resistance. For over 2 decades, there's been this really, really strong partnership with activists coming from all over to join the nonviolent resistance in this Palestinian community that faces extreme ethnic cleansing, enforced displacement, villages being raided at night by settlers and the military, homes being demolished, kids being attacked by settlers on the way to school. So I was planning on moving to this community for a few months to study an Arabic course, and Tal was preparing his refusal, and in Misalvot, the network that we come from, Misalvot means refusers in Hebrew, in the feminine conjugation. It's a network that supports refusers through legal advice that is very crucial, and in public campaigns, and mainly having a social network to support us. So we were also very excited for the new refusers that were coming up and preparing everything, and then a October 7th came, waking up at 6:30 in the morning. I was at my parents' house, waking up to the sound of sirens and bombs non-stop. Very scary. We didn't understand what is going on. First call, obviously, to my grandparents in the kibbutz next to the Gaza border to hear what's going on with them. It took time to get connection. My grandma said she's hearing a lot of shootings around the kibbutz. There was no information in the media in the beginning. It wasn't clear what's going on. The journalists themselves didn't know what's going on. Sorry, it was very, very scary, very terrifying. Thankfully, my grandparents are okay. It took three very stressful days until they were able to evacuate the kibbutz, but it was very, very terrifying. And at the same time that I was worried for my grandparents, we were also starting to get messages from the Palestinians and the activists that were currently there in Masafiriyata. From the second or the third day, we were starting to hear that settlers are using live ammunition inside of the villages. Basel Adewale, one of the creators of No Other Land, his cousin was shot in the middle of the village by militants. It was very, very scary, a whole new level of violence. If before we thought that we got to some kind of rock bottom of settler violence, this was a whole new opera. And in all this environment, it was very, our whole world changed, everything was very shaky. And in this environment, Todd's refusal was coming up in very, very big steps.
I think we're gonna take a break for people breaking the fast. Yeah.
So if folks want to head out the back of the sanctuary, you can make a left. There is enough food for everyone. However, we're asking that we let our folks who are Muslim and are fasting and breaking their fast go first. Just
1, 2, oh, okay. So the environment in 48 after October 7th was an environment of political repression, of censoring dissenting opinion. In the first couple weeks after October 7th, there were hundreds of students that were expelled or arrested for things as simple as posting a "Stop the War" caption on Facebook or having a Palestinian flag in their bio on Instagram. And it also, we felt it as Israeli and Jewish activists inside 48. The first protest we organized, we saw mass amounts of arrest, extreme police violence, also violence from the Israeli public that walked in the street and saw a protest. I myself got an egg thrown at my head. And this was the environment that I had my enlistment aid coming up. And to be honest, it was pretty scary. It was pretty scary to put myself in the front and to make that decision that I might be the face of what 90% of Israel hates so much, so deep in their heart. But what made me make the choice that I will go out publicly with it is the realization of how important it is, especially at the time of such political repression, and to use the privilege that I have of a supportive family, of a supportive community. I know that when I refuse, I will still be able to live at home, and I will still have friends to talk to after. There are many people that do not have the same privilege as me. And to use that privilege and to recognize what times we're living in, I decided that it was the right decision to become the first conscientious objector of the war. My story... The story blew up also in international media, and also inside Israel. A lot of people saw my story. I also got recognized inside prison, but the hardest part of it was getting just dozens and dozens of death threats. I got my phone leaked, my address leaked. Luckily, it was my old address. my mom got messages to her phone, it really felt scary to walk around in the street. I felt like I always needed some friends beside me to feel safe. And it's really, I sat 185 days in military prison. I was personally targeted by the head of the enlistment base, him giving a direct order down to his soldiers, telling them not to give me an exemption no matter what. I came in front of 2 conscientious committees, like Einat went in. In both times, they did not recognize me as a conscientious objector, citing that I could not be a conscientious objector because I want to change. They have this very narrow view of what it means to be a conscientious objector, and it has to be personal, you have to keep it to yourself, you can't talk to the world, you can't talk about what's going on in your backyard, you have to talk about it in a very general sense of being a pacifist. And I'm not a pacifist, so I do not expect to pass these committees. At the end, I got an exemption after 6 months in military prison, and it has, since then, it has had effects on my life. The experience in prison is not easy. Here it's important to say that the prisons that we sat in are not the same prisons that we hear about in the news that Palestinians sit in. They go through torture, violence, starvation. We sat in fairly good conditions with fellow soldiers who were imprisoned for various acts such as running away from the military base, smoking weed. And there are some people that sat there for more serious crimes like sexual violence inside the military, selling arms to groups. But the whole experience, I have to say that it made me gain a better understanding of Israeli society. Sitting in there, you sit with the people from the lowest socioeconomic level in Israel. And I met people that I would have never met outside of prison in my cozy house in Tel Aviv. I met people that have to think about working to finance their family, their sisters and brothers. I met people that live through, in the military, they live through the oppressive machine that just as it oppresses the Palestinians, and it also oppresses the people that are taking part in these horrible crimes.
Maybe I'll give a few sentences about Misalvot, the organization that we come from, and then we'll continue to the next part. So in Misalvot, like I've said, it's a support network, and I wanted to share that, like, the excitement that we have right now of Itamar Greenberg, the latest refuser that was exempted last week after he was sentenced to 195 days in military prison, the most that a refuser has sat was sentenced to in almost 2 decades. So we're very excited that he just got exempted. And there's a new refuser coming up. Her name is Ella Kaidar Greenberg. She's a good friend and a very brave trans woman. She's 18 years old. She has her enlistment date on March 19th, which is just in a second. She is going to publicly refuse, and we do not know what sentence she's going to get, what conditions she's going to be held in, whether she's going to be sent to men's prison or to women's prison, whether she's going to be kept in solitude or in the regular prison. We really don't know what's going to happen. So I asked you all to follow her story on social media. She's going to also be in the media, hopefully. And I think that, like, in these times that we really face immense uncertainty, and the military is changing their principles all the time, and it's very unclear what's going to happen. So we need your support more than ever in having this solidarity of so many people showing up to hear our stories. So many people that we see all across Canada. We're already in the middle of the tour, and seeing how many people are supporting the Palestinian struggle in their own way, whether it's joining Palestinian initiatives, Palestinian protests, whether it's initiating humanitarian aid to Gaza, whether it's supporting Israeli refusers. It's so important, and we are, our role is to be part of the struggle from within, and we need you guys for the struggle from outside. It's gonna happen just working together.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. I really appreciate your stories and the way that you connected it to much more and many systems of oppression that exist in our societies. And I think we all can answer the call to do things from here on Turtle Island to support the work that you and others are doing. It is my pleasure to invite to this stage one of the organizers of tonight's event, Charles from IJV Hamilton.
Thank you. I won't take up much time. Independent Jewish Voices is an organization that stands for justice, equality, and human rights, and against oppression, apartheid, and settler colonialism. IGV aims to make it clear that there are Jews here in Canada who are opposed to the atrocities, the brutalities, and the devastation that's being carried out by Israel, and who will state that this violence and Canada's support for it is not being carried out in our name. And that the actions being taken these days by the State of Israel are not making Jews safer. Not in Canada, not in Israel, not anywhere in the world. So, IJV is active across Canada, including here in Hamilton, sponsoring events, actions, and activities. If you'd like to join with us, you can add your name to the mailing list at the back, at the table at the back, or you can email us at ijvhamilton@gmail.com. You can support us by making a donation in the jar on the IJV table, or you can use a tap to pay, which is also at the table at the back. Part of the funds we receive for this event will also go to the Mesargot Network, Refusers Network, and to the Hamilton Committee to Stop the War. So we hope you'll stay in touch with us. And again, just a reminder, there's some Mesargot info with a link to their website, papers on our table at the back. The ushers have, the ushers have hats also that you can make donations into. There's Ken on the side, has one of the red hats, so they'll be circulating, and you can make donations in there if you like. Thank you for your generosity. And ushers also have index cards. If you want to ask questions, please, that's the way we're going to be collecting the questions. So the ushers will be going up and down. Just grab one of them. They'll give you an index card, and we'll collect them at the end and pass them up to Tal and Einat. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. I'd like to invite Diane Blanchard to speak.
Hi, I'm Diane Blanchard. I'm a retired United Church minister. This isn't my church, but it's one of our denominational churches, and we are, I'm really glad that we have you all here in this space. The United Church has had historic relationships with the Christians in Palestine and Israel, as well as a lot of organizations that have been working to end the occupation, working for justice. And so, both because of those relationships and our sense of God's work of justice and mending the world, we are also involved here in Canada in advocating for ceasefire, in advocating for an end to selling armaments, all of those kinds of things. We address the government of Canada to appeal for for our role as Canadians in building peace in Israel and Palestine. So thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for your...
Thank you so much, Diane. I would like to invite a representative from the Hamilton and District Labour Council to speak. I see folks from a part of the council looking around. I'm not sure who is speaking. No. Okay. They're not here. Okay, but that's okay. And we're really grateful to all of the different labor movements that have come out tonight to support this and are here. Many of them are marshalling. We're very appreciative. The labor movements in Hamilton always show up for everybody, so it's really, really lovely to be here. Before we turn it back over to Tal and Einat, it is my pleasure to have Lama from Oakville for Palestine, as well as the Oakville Multicultural Center to speak this evening. So I'll turn the mic over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I am from the president of Multicultural Community Association from Oakville. My name is Lama, and I came all the way from Oakville. I thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. I also thank IGV, and my friends Rabbi David and Charles for the invite. I will make it very brief. I am, of course, here to listen more than speaking. I salute the courage of our speakers, Tal and Einat. We support you, we respect you, and we encourage you to continue. And I believe we should always join forces to empower you and empower Palestine through this movement. A revolution against the Israeli fascist government should come from the inside. So I thank you once again. We have been seeing and hearing some voices, a lot of voices, that are refusing to accept your voices. And they are even attacking the Oscars for the documentary that won an Oscars. And they keep framing it as if it's normalization with Israel, or as if we are stupid, that we are somehow accepting apartheid when we support these voices, Israeli and Palestinian voices, that we should all work together now to end the genocide and end the apartheid. I have to say one thing, that the fascist war criminal and the terrorist Netanyahu has been bragging all over the media about fake victories that the IDF is doing against a defenseless population. So there's no victory. Like, the IDF hasn't been fighting against an army. They have been genociding defenseless populations. So I respect people, and we have to encourage more people like you both. It's very shameful for Israelis to join the IDF. It's a shame, a shame. These people are committing genocide. I'm here again as an Arab. I'm the granddaughter of a Palestinian man who was expelled from Jaffa to Jordan, and I am a third generation from Jordan. It's very important to show that there are Arab voices out there that are happy to work with you guys, happy to work and partner with IGV, and we should advocate more and join forces together and make this movement bigger and bigger to make change in Canada, so we can make change and empower the defenseless people of Palestine. So I'm going to end it here. Thank you very much, and I appreciate the opportunity.
evening. Has everyone had a chance to submit their questions to the ushers? If not, maybe just, raise your hand and someone can come around and grab them. So our first question is, what's the difference between a public refusal and the other types?
There are many ways in which you can refuse. When you refuse to serve, some people who refuse are able to receive exemptions on medical grounds or on mental grounds or on a conscientious ground, which is the toughest, but some are able to get it. And some aren't able when they're imprisoned. Some of those who are imprisoned are vocal about it and some aren't. And there's also a different part of the society that is the ultra-Orthodox community, which most of them receive exemptions on religious grounds because they join yeshivas after high school, so they have this arrangement with the government that they don't need to serve. So there's all different kinds, and in Misavot we have refusers who sat in prison, refusers who didn't sit in prison, ones who are anonymous, ones who are public about it. We're home for all kinds of refusers who refuse from political motives, from the motive of resisting the occupation and the genocide. And we have also different kinds of political views. We're not a political party, I'm a pacifist, we have anarchists, we have communists, ones who don't define their politics, we have all kinds.
Thank you. Our next question is, do you feel hopeful that real change is coming, or even, is there any change coming at all?
I think I might be a bit more optimistic than Tal. I think that change can come and will come if we continue to struggle. And the reality is very, very violent and very depressing, obviously, and we're all facing political persecution. We are facing it, and I understand that you guys are facing it too. It's very tough to speak up, but I feel like there is room for hope. I know that many people refuse because they saw Tal's videos, because it made them feel that there's other people that like seeing someone that has the same views and has the option to refuse. Many Israelis don't know that refusal is even an option. So it does make waves. I think that No Other Land is a very important tool to make this change, and I think the co-resistance in Musafiriyata and in other communities in the West Bank is an important window for change. And there's more and more protests on the streets. It is important to say that these are protests for a hostage deal and a ceasefire or to end the war, which is very, very important, and just a small part of the protest takes the other step ahead of talking about human rights for everyone between the river and the sea, and talking about the genocide. But I feel like there are parts of society that we do have room to work with, and that's what we are trying to do. Of course, there's major parts that are very, very fascist, and many young people are more fascist than their parents are, and it can be very depressing, but I think that we can make a change. What do you think?
As Einat said, I'm not as much of an optimist, and I don't want to come here and lie about being an optimist. We were very happy when the ICC warrants for Netanyahu and Gallant came out, and it made me really believe that maybe, because there's no way, I don't see a way in which there's a majority of Israelis that come out and say that they're in support of Palestinian human rights or Palestinian liberation. But there is a way of isolation from the world, of cultural boycott, of divestment from Israeli-made goods that makes Israeli society feel what it means to be a society that is committing genocide. that was the hope that I had when the ICC warrants came out, when soldiers were getting arrested for being the ones that were committing genocide. And now with Trump and the rise of the far right in many other countries, it's hard to see that future, and it's hard to look past that. But I still hold on to a little bit of hope. Yeah.
What is the situation for Palestinians within 48? As well, are Israeli Arabs, do they experience pressure to enlist? Does the Israeli government even bother to feed them propaganda?
Palestinians with Israeli citizenship don't need to enlist. It's like the Druze men are obligated to enlist, but the Palestinians or Israeli citizens aren't obligated to enlist, but they face extreme political persecution, as we said before. Many people are being arrested, teachers, professors in university, students, different kinds of people for voicing their opinions or for just expressing their Palestinian identity in the smallest ways. It's a very, very terrifying environment. I think I can't speak for the experience of a Palestinian living in the 48 borders, but it's very tough, and I think that's also why it's so important that we use our privilege, that we can speak up and not face the same consequences. It's a very big struggle, and I think it's something also that's important to say is that many Palestinians that live in 48 have families in Gaza who are being murdered. And it's so hard because they can't even speak up about what's going on, and they're in this grief that that the Israeli society isn't recognizing their grief. And I can't even imagine how difficult it is. I have friends who have their family members being killed or not answering their texts in Gaza, and it's very terrifying.
Sorry, I'll add a little bit about the military service of Palestinian citizens of Israel. As colonial systems often do, they use a policy of divide and conquer amongst the Palestinians. If it's dividing Palestinian citizens of Israel from Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, and also inside 48 Palestinians, there are divisions that the Israeli system has made between the Druze and the Palestinian Muslims and the Palestinian Christians and the Bedouins. And in that way, it makes it easier for them to come and indoctrinate each of the groups at one time. So for example, with the Bedouin Palestinians that live in the desert and in the north, there are schools, like their school systems are horrible because they get no funding from the government. They live in the most poverty that there is in Israeli society. So the parents have a choice of either sending their kids to a school that doesn't get any funding, or up the street, there's this new fancy military school that they can go to. And in that, sadly, a lot of Bedouins get indoctrinated in those kinds of schools and decide to choose to enlist into the Israeli military. And I met many of those inside of prison. And the same thing with the Druze community. That's what happens. And sorry, just one last thing. I'd like to share a story of someone, a delivery driver that I worked with. I knew that he was Palestinian, and I talked to him about politics around the elections in the United States, and he was very thoughtful always and having very critical opinions. And when I told him about my refusal and the fact that I sat in prison, I could see him getting excited because a lot of Palestinians don't come in contact with Israelis that empathize with the pain that they've gone through in this past year and a half, and these past 70+ years. And he opens his phone and he shows me his screensaver, and in the screensaver I see 2 little girls, and he tells me, these are my 2 little girls, they're in Gaza right now. The right one is 3 years old, and the left one is 1 year old, and I have never seen her. And talking to him since, I've heard stories about his FaceTiming with them and them going back to their house in Khan Yunis and then getting demolished again. And that's just the reality that
Because he has a citizenship and they don't.
Yes, so that's just the reality he has to live in.
Thank you for answering that. There was a number of people who asked questions surrounding PTSD and returning soldiers or those who are currently working for the IDF. And so someone had wrote, what effects do you see in Israeli society due to militarism, particularly around PTSD, family violence, etc.?
Thank you for the question. We are seeing we're starting to see more violence in the Israeli society, and I think as time goes by, we're going to see it more. Many people are coming back with severe trauma and PTSD, and as you know, like, women are the first one who are going to feel the effect of this. There is more conversation and more things done regarding mental health and PTSD in the Israeli society. In the past decade, there's been a lot of progress done, but the situation is still very bad, and many people are untreated and unrecognized. There are more options, and there is more treatments, but the path is there's a very long path, and society is getting like, I feel like each generation, like my grandpa's generation came back with PTSD from the 73 war, the 67 war, and then there was the generation that came back from Lebanon with PTSD, and now my generation is also being affected by it, and I think we're going to see it years to come. I think it is important to say that, like, the conversation about PTSD in Israeli studies is very important. It's not talked about enough, and it is still a very, very, very big taboo. Talking about manliness that Tom said before, it connects with that. I do want to highlight that we have a long way to go, but there are facilities, and we do have facilities, and we do have ways to treat people, and the Palestinians living around us do not have those facilities, do not have those resources at all. Palestinians, their day-to-day life is experiencing ongoing trauma and violence. In the West Bank, in Gaza, do not even have the option to seek treatment for that. There's no facilities and resources for that, and I think that's also important to highlight.
How common are refusers in Israel, and has the number increased since October 2023?
We are the fringe of the fringe of the fringe of the fringe in our society. A couple of events ago when we were in Kingston, a supporter of Israel stood up and said, "You guys are so fringe, they're more flat earthers than you." And I think that might be actually true in Israel. And it's sad that we're so fringe. Since I refused, there have been 11 public refusers in the past 17 months. And there have been many more that have refused without coming out publicly. We know that there is a majority of Israelis that support a ceasefire deal, a hostage deal that will end the war. Since the first 6 months of the war, there's been a majority of Israelis that support ending it. On the contrary, polls also suggest that around 80% of Israelis support the Trump transfer plan from Gaza. So that's the way that we can kind of see also supporting ending the war, but also supporting the transfer. So again, we have no support in any we have no power in any way in our society. But I think that something that I sometimes say that, and I really do feel that if I am ostracized from my society for speaking up for human rights, and if I'm ostracized from the society that is committing genocide, it only brings me closer to the society that is undergoing the genocide. And talking to Palestinians, I can tell how much of a difference it makes when I tell them that I did not go to the military, that I did not arm the checkpoints that they have to painfully cross on a daily basis. And the ostracization just brings me closer to other people.
Following up with talking about refusers, do you see an influence on the refuser movement? How is that influencing Israeli society and politics?
I think that refusal very much scares Israeli society, because it's questioning and criticizing something that's at the core of our society, of our identity. And I think there's something very scary about refusal. Having people that are criticizing this, like we're told, like the military is such a, I can't emphasize how much it's such a big part of our society. Like there's this saying, when parents want their kids to eat, their little kids to eat, because they can say, you should eat so you can be a strong soldier. If you're not going to eat, you're not going to be a strong soldier. It could be said to like a 3-year-old. So it's a very big part of our society, and criticizing it really scares Israeli society. I think that we did see a big, like Tal said before, a big wave of change during the protest against the judicial reform, where after many years that refusal wasn't in the public discourse and wasn't seen as a legitimate political tool. Now it was, during 2023, it was seen as an important tool of civil disobedience, and many people in the protests talked about it. Of course, that many of them now are pilots dropping bombs on Gaza, or things have changed. It was the use of refusal was just specifically for the judicial reform, but it did open the window, I think, to talk about it. And there are people criticizing, and as the war goes by, more and more people in reserve are refusing to go back. They go home, and some of them don't. They refuse to go back. We accompany some of them. Yeshua, another refusal movement, accompanies the rest. And there are people who are refusing, and things are shifting. Like some people go out of Gaza and refuse to go in again, or go out of Lebanon and refuse to go in again. So there is some effect happening, and I think that the importance of continuing to talk about refusal and continuing to be on the streets, in social media, in the media we're trying, sometimes we succeed and sometimes we don't, but it's very important to bring all the time that voice. I think social media is a very big tool on that, to having conversation about refusal. It's something that's very important for us to do, and to having spaces like Missalvot we do sometimes, like public events, and even just our social media posts. It's a space for talking, for criticizing, and I think there is a window, and we're trying to widen it.
And I'll direct this question to you. Could you talk about women's role in the Israeli military?
Thank you for the question. It's a really interesting topic, because I think the liberal feminism in Israeli society, specifically the secular society, one of the biggest goals is to achieve equality inside of the military. It's seen as a very important glass ceiling to break. I remember, like in high school, like when we used there would be very heated discussions over the differences, over whether the differences between females and males should stop women from being part of combat units. It's seen as a big success that today most of the combat units are open for women. And there's this pilot, there's this woman that she wanted to be a pilot in the beginning of the 2000s that we learned about in schools, how she fought to be able to also be a pilot in the Israeli military. While I do think that there should be equality in all the spaces, that's not my feminism. My feminism... My feminism is not the feminism that the girls in my class would express, that they also want to be in the combat units and just like the men, and it's seen as a big success that this is the first war that women also invaded Gaza. Amazing equality, isn't it? What a privilege to commit genocide too. So for me, I think like the feminism that like how I see that feminism should be my feminism is not being part of the system, but creating an alternative, resisting it, being from the outside, changing the systems that oppress us and not trying to be part of them. Not trying to be generals like the men and not trying, if you look at the Israeli politics, a big majority of the politicians are men who came from the military. And if you look at the most high-paid positions in the civil society, if you look at big companies who leads them, if you look at many of the mayors in Israeli cities are ones who came from the military. And I think that like I wish that more and more feminists in our society will fight to change those systems and to create an alternative that's not this machoistic, violent, kind of feminine, like this, not want to be part of the violence, but trying to change it and bring a different voice and connecting the struggles. I think one of the biggest successes of the Israeli state is dividing all these groups, dividing up I think that maybe I'll finish with giving an example of a really heartbreaking example of there's this story of this trans woman that is in Israel, that she's in combat, and it's very, very popular. It was like on YouTube on the national TV, and it's seen as a big success that a trans woman was invading Gaza too, and seeing and there was these photos of gay men who served in the military, and they're proposing, there's a proposal on the ruins of Palestinian homes and maybe bodies. That's not my feminism, and that shouldn't be. That's not feminism. That's not a struggle for liberation. That's not a struggle for liberation. We can't liberate just a part of us and while oppressing the other. And the feminism that I hope that we can spread more is the feminism of intersectionality.
This is just a message from someone in the audience who says, I'm one of the few Muslims attending this event. I came a long way to thank you both and show support for the great task you guys have taken up. God bless you. Thank you. I'm going to combine two questions here, but how do you push back against being called self-hating Jews, etc., as well as what do you say to people who tell you you're naive, your worldviews are naive, and how do you think people become less naive to the type of work that you're doing in refusing military service?
What's naive? Well, wait, I'll start with this. What's naive is to believe that you can take out a whole people. What's naive is to believe that genociding 7 million people from the river to the sea is a possibility, or that it will bring security to any of us. That's what I answer to people that say that I'm naive. And with that possibility, when you recognize it as impossible, immoral, and reprehensible on every ground, the only option left is striving for justice and for taking apart the colonial system that exists in our land. And to talk about the term self-hating Jew, anti-Semitism is a real problem in the world. And it comes a lot from the right, and sometimes it also infects the left spaces. But at the same time, we need to know that, and the mainstream needs to realize that being an anti-Zionist, being against Jewish supremacy, this is not an anti-Semitic thing to say. Historically, Jews have been a part of liberation struggles from South Africa to the United States, and there are a lot of Jews who have opposed this Jewish supremacy in Palestine throughout history. So what's anti-Semitic is to think that all Jews should be a monolith, that all Jews should support this fascist state. Again, we have to be careful inside of our communities and oppose racism, anti-Semitism, anti-Palestinian hatred in all its forms, and be careful for the people that we're fighting with.
And that's, I think, a very important role that you have, everyone who's sitting in this room here. It's a very important role internationally and in Canada to stand up for those differences and between criticizing Israel and speaking up for human rights and anti-Semitism. Tackling anti-Semitism and calling it and calling it by its name is very, very important. And standing on the difference and not letting those who want to blend criticism of Israel and anti-Semitism.
These next set of questions kind of go back to describing what is happening in Israel and sort of how things are structured. So you seem to equate domestic security with military force, soldiers, etc. Does Israel have police forces?
Oh, do we have police forces?
Yes, the answer is yes.
Actually, when I went to the Conscientious Committee, while they were testing me to see if I was a real pacifist, they told me, oh, if you don't want to be in the military, maybe you should enlist to the police. That way you don't have to harm the people around you. And I looked at them with this face of, what are you talking about? Anyway, so yes, the police in Israel are highly militarized. There's municipal police in the big cities, like in all cities. Usually our protests are in Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and Haifa. There are differences between the violence that they use, and also there is military police that come to help the municipal police when they need it, using extreme, even more violence, using stun grenades and different tactics to take apart protests. And these tactics are used obviously even more if it's a Palestinian-led protest, or if the messages are not to the police's liking. But we live also in a police state. We have friends that their houses have been raided, that we know that the police are monitoring us, and it sometimes feels useless to text on Signal when we know that they know what we're going to do anyway. So.
And then this is the second part of this question. As you talk of military prisons, here military prisons are for soldiers, not for people who aren't in the military. Do you have domestic jails as well? And I guess the follow-up question is, why would you not serve your time in a domestic jail if you're not actually in the military?
So I'll give a quick explanation. So there is the regular civil prisons, like you have here in Canada, which people who are sentenced in a civil court go to a civil prison. We sat in a military prison. That's not the, like Ted said before, not the military prisons that Palestinians are held in. We sat in a specific military prison where soldiers or ones who refuse to be soldiers are held in. It contains a women's apartment and a men's apartment, and there's different it's different kinds of prisons, and refusers are always held in the military prisons, except for the beginning of the 2000s, and I think 2002, there were 5 refusers that refused publicly, and they were sentenced for 3 years. At the end, they sat 2 years, and they sat part of their time in a military prison and part of it in a civil prison, but that's the only incident where refusals sat in a civil prison.
It's because the way they sentence us is they court-martial us, like they court-martial soldiers
inside the military system.
Inside the military system.
We also don't have a criminal record because it was inside the military system.
If there was a message that you could give to Zionists who grew up in Canada, what would you say to them?
I have American parents, I don't know if I said that, and I know a lot of the community in the US of Jewish people, and my grandparents are in the Jewish Federation, I'm sure you know of it. And I think something very inspiring that my family has gone through is when my parents came to Israel. This was obviously not from this anti-Zionist perspective or anything like that, but from the experience that my father and my mother had inside Israel. It really influenced my grandparents' opinion, and it really opened their mind to the possibility that Israel and the ideas that they grew up on are not always perfect. And listen, I think the message is to listen to the opposition from inside, because sometimes it's easy to forget, and it's easy to forget that Israeli society is not a monolith, and you don't always have to believe, you don't always have to blindly support Israel. You actually have to criticize it, even if you love it so much, and it feels like your homeland, and it feels like where you belong. You have the duty to criticize it when it is doing wrong, and the more you criticize it, the more you will realize that there's a lot to criticize.
And I think we know that it can be very, growing up as an Israeli Jew in the Zionist, with the Zionist narrative, and from the people that we're meeting here in Canada, we understand it's this indoctrination is also very common in the Jewish communities on Turtle Island. So I think it can be, I want to say that it can be very, very tough, and it can shake very basic parts of your identity and what you were told growing up, and these basic values that you were taught by your family. And it can be very scary to ask those questions. And I think that, what I would say is to encourage to ask those questions, even when they're hard, and to listen to stories of Palestinians' experiences, even when it doesn't align with what you know. But just open your ears and listen. It can be very startling at first, but I think having an open mind and an open heart to listen to things that maybe don't completely align with what you were told, that's the way to start.
There's not a lot of literacy in Western media and movements about the vast political spectrum of both Palestinian and Israeli societies. Can you speak a little bit to the importance and significance of building Palestinian and Israeli ties and relationships on the land?
Like I've said before, we live in very separated societies. There is a physical wall that is also a very big separation factor, but it's not only the wall. There is separation. Theoretically, in 48 borders, you can roam around from wherever, but cities are separated, and people go, and children go to different schools, and you don't have Palestinian friends usually, and many Palestinians in the West Bank have never met Israelis who aren't soldiers. And that's how the apartheid regime holds on, because there's no human connection. Human connection is the biggest threat to this regime. And creating those connections can be very hard, and you need to initiate them. And it's the most important thing we can do. I think it's the co-resistance that's the way, that's what I believe in, and I think that's and we have different spaces creating that, and it can be very tough, and we come from different societies, and we were told different things, and breaking those conceptions that we grew up on is very, very tough, and it can be very scary. And I think there's places that we are able to do that. And I wish there's gonna be more, it's gonna spread with time, more and more spaces like these spaces will grow.
There's, as Einat said, the wall is the physical barrier between us, but there's also a very big mental barrier between us. Culturally, language-wise, I think it's insane that we don't learn Arabic in school, that we learn the literature Arabic that cannot be used in anywhere in the street, in the Palestinian street. I think that taking down those walls physically and mentally by, for example, studying Arabic, or as Einat said, listening to the neighbors that we live next to, is a way that we can create this joint struggle. And about the range of societies inside Israel, like inside Israeli society and Palestinian society, it's important to tell the difference, because a lot of us, like, there is the coalition and there's the opposition, and it's sometimes hard to differentiate between their views, because you look at their Twitter and they're all condemning the ICC, they're all wanting to continue the war, but there are nuances in the Israeli politics that will be able to aid the struggle to continue. The opposition to Netanyahu, for example, is critical because, and not letting him do everything he wants is critical and crucial to continue the fight and not have all our rights taken away.
Unfortunately, this will be our last question, as we're nearing the end of our time together. So our last question is, what is your vision for the future of the country you live in? Easy.
Finishing, yeah, that's easy. As I said, it's really hard to see a future. It's really hard to envision what a place might look like without the systems that we know. And I think there's like this sentence I like, that it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. So the same thing with occupation. It's easier to imagine nothing existing than the occupation not existing. And that goes for also the oppression inside 48. But when talking to people with more political vision than me, they talk about the two-state solution, they talk about the one-state solution. And I think there are avenues that we could take in all of these ways to ensure political and human rights for all people, from the river to the sea. And the most important thing is that all people who live in the land get a seat at the negotiating table, because Israel negotiating with Qatar or Israel negotiating with Europe is not helpful to creating a solution with the Palestinians. There needs to be a seat for the Palestinians at the negotiating table.
I would add that just that it does seem very far, and we're in a kind of survival mode, and just like what we're doing right now is trying to like fight for talking about human rights as a legitimate thing for everyone, which is a big struggle to talk about the fact that that everyone between the river and the sea should have human rights. That's a really radical thing to say, unfortunately. So it seems very, very far away. But I think that I have hope from seeing other fascist regimes. Israel is not the first and not the last occupation state that is committing a genocide or a fascist regime. It's not the first and it's not the last. There are many examples around the world. Looking at fascist Italy, looking how there was a lot of support in Canada and the U.S. for invading Afghanistan, looking at South Africa. There's too many examples, and those regimes, some of them fell, and there has been change, and of course it's not perfect, but I think looking at maybe at the reconciliation done in Rwanda is an amazing example, and of course the situation there is not perfect right now, but having community courts, and these are things that that I wish that maybe someday we can also have. Yeah. So I just want to thank very much everyone who was here today. Thank you for your open hearts and your open minds, and for being here and for asking your questions. And I hope you spread the stories of refusal inside of Israeli society, support the Palestinian struggle in any way that you feel that resonates with you. And I would like to ask you if you feel that you can and want to support support Misalvot Network, the network that is our political home, the home for the Israeli refusers. On the IJV desk, you can support IJV, which is the amazing organization that invited us here. You also can support Misalvot. We're in a very crucial need for support of our legal assistance. So yeah, thank you very much for being here today. Hi. Before everyone leaves, we do have one final speaker to close us off for this evening. There are a few announcements I would like to make. So No Other Land, which is a film that was mentioned a couple of times this evening, will be showing on Monday, March 17th at the Ancaster Memorial Arts Center at 7:15 p.m. Next.
Is that where you're going?
Hello, you can still hear me? Okay, great. Next Sunday, the pro-Palestinian Al-Quds Day rally for 2025 is taking place in Toronto on Sunday, March 23rd at 3 p.m. At 361 University Avenue, which is across the street from the U.S. Consulate. There are celebrations happening all over the world for the second last week of Ramadan. It's the largest annual global demonstration of solidarity with Palestine in the world. So please come out and join. The Hamilton Coalition to Stop the War will be organizing carpooling opportunities, so please reach out to them via Facebook. And then I invite everyone to, once we conclude, make your way to the basement if you would like to bring home some food. We have some leftovers. And it is my pleasure to introduce Rabbi David, who will close off this evening. Thank you so much.
So again, just thank you all for coming, especially thank you Tal and Einat for everything you've done, for your courage, your commitment, your vision. I want to quote the Talmud that says, Lo hamidrash ha'ikar ela hama'aseh. That the main thing is not talking about something, but doing something about it. That's a great Jewish teaching, that what matters is our actions. And I want to encourage everyone here to learn from Einat and Tal to do what you can do as you. They're doing what they can do as them. Where they got born, when they got born, they talked about the privilege they know they have, and they're using it, you know? So every single one of us here can kind of take from their model and that teaching from the Talmud that says the main thing is not talking about something, but doing something about it. And just thank you all for being here, and thank everyone who helped organize this evening.